Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, it really is a honor and a privilege to be here. I had the opportunity to take a look at some of the previous speakers, and just to be included in this group is a little eye-watering. I thought before we would start, I'd like to share something with you that is truly heartfelt. I'm not going to try to get through it, so this is just from my family to you. So with that, somebody's got to know what you can and can't do. A man's got to know his limitations, and I know that I would not have gotten through that, so that truly is heartfelt. I thought I would go over what the goals are for this presentation, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to set the bar pretty low. This is a gentleman who I worked for quite a bit in the Marine Corps, kind of one of my heroes. A lot of you probably know him better as Secretary Mattis, but he had a saying, and this is an actual quote: "PowerPoint makes you stupid." As you can see, I am using PowerPoint, so one of my goals is that when you leave here, I haven't sucked out any brain cells that you're going to need to use, the important things that you do for the rest of the day. The second goal, again, fairly low, is that Jenny, when she asked me, she said, this is going to be video recorded, which gave me a little bit of pause for concern. So the next goal is that we will not make this viral, because I promise you, whatever would make this of interest will not be good. So let's just shoot that. But in all honesty, the third goal is I'm going to talk about leadership for the next 45 minutes or so. I'm going to talk about it within the context of the Marine Corps, but I think there's a lot of application here on this campus in this hospital that I hope to be able to cull out a little bit. And I'm going to talk about one specific aspect of leadership, and that's moral character. And I want to bring that out because, quite frankly, I think it's something that, as I will point out in the presentation, that is something that we don't do either a lot of, and because we don't do a lot of it, at least on the Lawrence campus, I'm not sure even what we do is very effective. And I'll present that in the way that the Marine Corps does it specific. So a little bit about my story. As was mentioned, I did my undergraduate at the University of Kansas. I was a first generation college student. And quite frankly, I was a rather uninspiring student. As you heard, I graduated in December, which should automatically mean one of two things. Either I excelled, which wasn't the case. But I think part of the reason why that was is I did a lot of exploring. I really tried to figure out what my why was, what my purpose, what my goal was. And that was a lot of the time that I spent, and the reason why I spent that additional time at KU. Fortunately, one of the things that wasn't necessarily one of my whys did happen in 1980, and that was I did meet my wife, as was mentioned. She was a engineer and computer science major. I have no idea why she was at the wheel, because she barely ever spent that time. I know why I was, but as it may, 35 years of marriage and 5 children, that seems to have worked out fairly well. So anyway, during my time trying to figure out what my why was, I knew what I didn't want to do, and that is not a picture of my father, but for me, that is the figure that my father kind of portrayed, and that is he wore the suit, and quite frankly, that's what I thought everybody did when they graduated from KU. They went into business and industry, and I knew that just did not light the fire under my gut, and so that was a bit of a concern on what I was going to do afterwards. Well, fortunately, I had a roommate in a fraternity brother who said, you know what, I'm going to go down and go talk to the Navy, and I'm going to talk to them about flying jets for the Navy. And I was like, well, I don't know if I want to join the Navy, but yeah, I'll tag along with you. And with that, I happened to, right next to them, I happened to walk into the Marine Corps recruiter, officer selection officer, and this is basically what I saw.
Okay, are you tired of the media spinning the truth and pushing false narratives on you?
Skip that.
The Marines are looking for a few good men. For almost 200 years, we've kept our standards high and our ranks small. Today, we're still a tough club to join, a tough team to make, and that's exactly the way we're going to keep it. So we're looking for quality, not quantity. We're looking for a few good men who can stand for the United States Marines. No compromises, no shortcuts, no promises, except one. You will be a Marine, one of the few, and one of the finest. The Marines are looking for a few good men.
Well, I can't explain. Just make sure that doesn't start, which it is. Okay, there we go. Okay, great. So anyway, that, for whatever reason, spoke to me. That was my why. Both the difficulty, but also the courage, the honor, and commitment. I started understanding what I wanted to do. And so that's what I did for the next 27 years. I flew Cobras and V-22. And as mentioned, I spent a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan. Interestingly enough, most of my time in that particular was on the ground side as opposed to flying. Interestingly enough, and probably the most ironic thing in the world, when I came back to the University of Kansas, they said, hey, would you be interested in teaching a leadership class? And so I ended up donning classrooms and probably spent more time in those classrooms in 3 years as an instructor than I did teaching a 3-hour class than I did taking however many 180 hours at KU over a 4.5-year period. So there is a little bit of irony in that. But the class that we teach is leadership, and it's interesting because you talk about it, and it's basically an undergraduate class, and it walks you through all the leadership theories. Talks about the great man theory, transactional leadership, transformational leadership, inspirational leadership, servant leadership, but then it rests on this thing called adaptive leadership, and this is what the University of Kansas, certainly within the communication studies, which is where the Institute of Leadership Studies, basically that resides. This is basically the theory that they have rested upon. And I'm going to talk about some of the main points on there because they do reflect also military leadership. And the first main point is this thing that you have to get your why. And so clearly, I got that. I mean, that's something that I talked about a little bit. Why do you want to be where you are? And I don't know if you're familiar with Simon Sinek, but he talks about that same very thing. And he said, there's a whole lot of people that understand what we do, and then there's a fewer amount of people that understand how we do it. But the smallest amount of people, this group, understands why we do it. Let me give you an example on that makes a lot of sense right here. What we do at a university, well, we basically recruit students, we educate students, and then we graduate students, and they go on. So everybody can understand what we do. But what about how we do it? Well, that's all of the business processes that go in to running a university, from the HR to the logistics, student services, faculty development, all of those things put together. Not to mention the endowment to build these incredible buildings and looking for there. So that's the how we do it. But question is why we do it. And if I ask people, and I do this frequently at the university, I said at Lawrence, I said, What's the mission statement of the university? That is the why. We just don't educate students. We educate leaders, the future leaders of the United States and the future leaders of the world. Additionally, we make, on this campus certainly as much as anywhere, we make discoveries that are going to change the world. And then the third thing, we build healthy communities. That is the why for the University of Kansas. And so that I think probably one of the best examples on the why happened during the space race. And so, you know, the United States felt like it was a little bit behind. And so President Kennedy said, we're going to send a man on the moon. And man, that got everywhere. And so he actually went down to NASA and he was checking everything out, walked through everything. And he went and he happened to see, while he was down there, he saw a custodian worker and he had a mop in his hand. He went up to him, he goes, hey, I'm Jack Kennedy, just curious, you know, what do you do here? And he goes, my name is, you know, so-and-so, I'm a janitor, and my mission is I'm putting a man on the moon. That is somebody that gets the why. That's an organization that understands the why. So with that, so that's the first part of adaptive leadership, understanding the why. The next portion of adaptive leadership is that it's focused on what they call adaptive challenges. These are the grand challenges. These are the challenges that, quite frankly, you're all here for. You know, the things like homelessness, how do you tackle that? How do you tackle college debt? How do you tackle global climate change? Arab-Israeli conflict, you know, the immigration crisis. And all of those particular problems have two components to it. The first component is the technical components. And quite frankly, we understand that. We understand the business processes of running a university. Those are the technical aspects of it. Those are the things that we have SOPs. The fact that you have a diagnosis, and then once you find the diagnosis, there is a protocol to follow. So we understand that aspect of it. But then there's this larger piece, quite frankly, the piece that we don't look at a lot, and that's the adaptive things and the adaptive portion of these grand challenges. Those are the things that you have to be able to change attitudes, to change values, to change belief systems. And when you do that, you're working in an environment of ambiguity and an uncertainty, and you have to be able to experiment and run those things. And so those are the things that really, this is where the work of leadership is. But quite frankly, when universities, and not just KU, but at large, when they are teaching leadership, this is probably the smallest part that they're teaching. The largest part is they're teaching the technical aspects of it, you know, that the things that are SOPs. And so I think we need to do a better job balancing on that. And so there are those two portions of the adaptive challenge. Let me give you an example that is the intersection of basically what I'm talking about, the military and the medical. Right now, we know that there's a significant amount of people between the ages of 17 and 24 that are unable to serve in the military. 75% of that military age recruiting population cannot serve. They're not qualified. Why aren't they qualified? Those are the reasons up there. The top two reasons, health problems and physical fitness. If you had to categorize what is the leading cause of those two things, obesity is the #1 reason. And we all know what the technical response for obesity. Tell people to diet, tell people to get on to exercise. I mean, there is a protocol to follow on that. That's the technical aspect. To change the actual behavior is a completely different challenge. That's the adaptive challenge. That's where you have to change people's values and their belief systems and their attitudes. That's where you have to work in this environment of uncertainty and ambiguity. And so that's just an example of the adaptive challenge, the first portion that I wanted to talk about on this adaptive leadership. The next thing, let me go on back on there. The next kind of highlight that I want to talk about on adaptive leadership. So we talked about the fact, the why, and we talked about the grand challenges and the fact that there's these two aspects. The next portion that I want to talk about is the fact that anybody can lead in adaptive challenges. Because you're trying to change people's belief systems, and so you don't have to have position, title, and authority. You just really have to care. That's the biggest aspect of that. So with that, I want to talk right now. So does any of this adaptive leadership, does it reside in the military? I mean, you know, a military that has so much rank structure, that is so focused on position, title, authority, it absolutely does. And the reason the reason I posit that is when we look at the future battlefields, I think a lot of people, when I say what, in 10 years, if you try to figure out where we are going to be fighting, you know, there are people that say, well, I think China and Russia are going to be the biggest threats on there. And the military will always focus on that because that's the most dangerous threat that's out there, but it's not the most likely threat. The most likely threat is the threat that we have been fighting. A lot of people look at 2001, 9/11, as something that was kind of an anomaly that just happened to show up. That is absolutely not the case. 9/11 brought something that had been happening overseas to our shores. And you can take a look at a lot of the things that happened in there. In the year 2000, we had the U.S. coal that was attacked. In the 1998, we had our two embassies in Kenya and Tanzania that were attacked. In 1993, the first World Trade Center bombing, which a lot of people don't even remember that was actually attacked. Over 1,000 people were injured in that attack. And then what really is considered the birth of this extremism fight against the United States is really in 1983, where our barracks in Beirut were attacked. The same year that I joined, the same in a situation where, you know, myriads of Marines were severely injured in that attack. So that is the environment in which I am putting forth that we are going to continue to fight. Yes, Afghanistan, Iraq, are they over? For the most part, they're pretty much winding down. But take a look at Yemen, take a look at Syria, take a look at Indonesia, and many other places. Violent extremism, I'm sorry to say, is on the rise, and it's something that we're going to have to deal with. And so if you accept that violent extremism, and that's the operational environment, which is kind of what we talk about, that is the playing field, then this adaptive leadership, how does that work out? And it comes out of the idea of the way the military fights in that type of environment. We don't fight in large units like we would if we were taking on Russia or China. That's not the way it happens. It happens on a very distributed battlefield. As a matter of fact, we call that distributed operations, where you have small units pushed out pushed out in far reaches. And these small units have young men and women who are the leaders, men and women who have the ranks of corporal, and that's what they call it. They call it the strategic corporal. And the reason they say that is because these young men and women, a corporal only has 4 to 9 people that are reporting to him, to her, and within that, they're far away from any type of leadership beyond themselves, and so they're empowered to make life and death type of situations that in no way in other future battlefields or in past battlefields have you seen so much authority powered down to these young men and women that have really not that much experience. And because of that, they're far away, they've got to make snap decisions, and probably one of the biggest things is the speed of information flow that is throughout the world. These people can make choices that have strategic implications. Do they have position, title, authority? Barely, but they're out there, and they can have these strategic. And unfortunately, I'm going to give you an example that is a bad example, that is a negative example of one of these things that happened that was just extremely poor. And that happened in 2011 in Helmand Province in Afghanistan. And it happened then, but the video wasn't released until January of 2012. And that video showed 4 Marines that were urinating on the dead bodies of Taliban fighters. And you can make all the excuses, excuse me, on why that happened. The constant pressure, the fact that they've had buddies that were killed. It doesn't matter. They desecrated bodies. It was an absolute violation of every law of war that they've been trained with, principle, that they are expected, the courage, honor, and commitment, the core values that they're expected to be upheld. Well, when this happened, General John Allen was the commander of all of the forces in Afghanistan. He said this was, in his 18 months to 2 years that he was there, this was the single biggest threat, biggest incident that he had to deal with in that entire time. 4 Marines violating every principle that they've had. Well, and I say that it had strategic implications. Well, this is what happened because of that. Nobody, it was completely lost on anybody that those were 4 dead Taliban soldiers, but it wasn't lost on anybody that there were 4 dead Muslims. And so what the world, and I don't mean just Afghanistan and Iraq, I mean the world saw was 4 Marines urinating on Muslims. And so immediately, I mean, what you talk about a viral video, that video absolutely went viral. And with mass demonstrations, and again, not just in Afghanistan, not just in Iraq, throughout the world. And unfortunately, those demonstrations, they had consequences. And one of the consequences was that France, who was one of our strategic allies, coalition partners in Afghanistan, they had 4 soldiers and I think 9 others, 4 who were killed by an insider threat. An Afghanistan soldier who just, he just couldn't accept what happened. And so he killed 4 French soldiers and injured 9 others. And then, in addition, after that, France had to make a decision. And their decision was they pulled out of the coalition 2 years early. 4 soldiers, 4 Marines, who took an action, an absolutely terrible action, and it had strategic consequences throughout, not just, again, the battlefield in Iraq, nationally, internationally. So you can see how this idea of this strategic corporal can play out. And you can see why, with all of the adaptive leadership, the one thing that I would argue that is missing from the authors of that is that there's not a moral component. They don't talk about moral character within adaptive leadership. And I think that's a huge loss. The military does, the Marine Corps does. So how does the Marine Corps teach basically leadership? John A. Lejeune was the 13th Commandant of the Marine Corps, and he basically broke down leadership into 3 parts. He said there was an intellect, there was a human understanding, and then there was that moral character. And the intellect, really, that's the technical aspect, the technical problems that I talked about. That's how you learn how to fly a helicopter. It's monkey skills. It's not the hardest thing in the world. I loved it, but it's still, I mean, it wasn't like the most challenging thing. And then there's the human understanding. The human understanding is that I understand the people within my unit. I understand what their needs are, and I'm able to empathize with them, but always in the context of mission. And then the last part, and that is the character, the moral character. And so I want to talk about how the Marine Corps approaches moral character, because again, I posited that that's a thing that a lot of people think that it's difficult to teach. It's difficult to teach because they automatically go to religion, or they automatically just say that, you know, values, my values and your values. I'm gonna say that the military, the Marine Corps, has got that figured out. And I'm going to start off with a quote. I'll let you take a look at it. It's from a gentleman, and for the physicians in the group here, you'll appreciate this. The gentleman who wrote this, Lord Moran, was a physician in World War I, and he was in the trenches. And during that period of time, he observed what he considered leadership and what he considered fortitude, in other words, courage. And the main points that I want to pull out there within this is that you cannot be a person of character in war unless you were that person of character in peace. You cannot, and the only thing that war actually does, it just accentuates whatever character you have, good or bad. And I think you saw that with those 4 Marines that urinated on their back. They may not have ever done that if well, they obviously wouldn't have done it if it wasn't in the context of war, but whatever issues that they had or whatever bad fabric or negative fabric they had was only accentuated in the hyper consequences of combat. And on the opposite side of that, the incredible courage that we see on the battlefield frequently is because that courage was formed well before, and that individual displayed that in peacetime throughout his throughout there. So I love that. I love that, and that's really the way the Marine Corps does that. So if that's if that is the way the Marine Corps says that that in combat you show what you have, what's in you in peacetime, then I think the good question is, so what do you do in peacetime? How do you build on that moral character? How do you develop that in peacetime? And so we get to the kind of the part, right? So how does the Marine Corps make Marines? And with that, we basically, through officers candidate school, if you're an officer, and boot camp, either in Parris Island or Camp Pendleton, if you are on the enlisted side. And while they're there, it doesn't matter if you're in which place you are, boot camp, or if you're going to be an officer at officers candidate school. The thing that is drilled in within the Marine Corps is that there is a sacred bond about being a Marine, something that I don't think exists as strongly in the Marine Corps as it does anywhere else. And it's the sacred bond. It's between the leader and the person being led, and it's a bond that is forged on the combat, the closeness of death, the shared hardships, all of the environment that we place ourselves in, the sacrifice for one another. Those are the things that are forged within the training that we do in peacetime. Now the question is, can you do that with a individual who comes to the military in, that's 17, 18 years old, that has 17 or 18 years of their own ethics, their own character? Can you really change that in, the 2 years before they become a strategic corporal? Well, let me give you, I wanted to show you an example. I've got another video here of just 2 minutes of what boot camp actually looks like, what officers candidate school, which is what this video is of, what it kind of looks like. I'll let you go do your magic. I'm not sure that started. Yeah, that's it.
It hurts to breathe. When you're too tired to think. When there's nothing more to give. Will the fighting spirit within you be enough to win the battles in front of you? Will you have the resolve your country can count on? To lead, to fight, to win, to become an officer of Marines.
There's a million things that a college graduate could be doing that are a heck of a lot easier than this.
We don't really care what you can do when you're well fed, well rested. We care how you act when you have no sleep.
lacking substance in your bodies, because that's when some true nature comes out.
You've been going since 4:30 in the morning. You haven't stopped moving. Just keeping your eyes open is an absolute challenge.
You may not get more than 3 hours sleep, and you have a full day ahead of you. We've been doing exercise all morning, and now we've got the leadership reaction course.
The mental fatigue here is more than I've ever encountered in my life. At the end of the day, you have to dig down deep, and you have to think of why you're here.
A lot of it's hard, right here. The feeling that they want to go home becomes stronger than the feeling that they want to stay, and they give up on themselves.
Body's telling you to quit. You got to keep pushing forward.
When everyone's tired and everyone's hungry, it mimics a combat situation. You're a leader, and you need to lead from the front.
I feel like if I can complete this, I can do anything.
That's the last video, so you can.
So the way the Marine Corps works with the intent to try to develop this moral character based on courage, honor, and commitment, the 3 core values that we have, is that basically throughout this 10 weeks or 12 weeks, if you're going to boot camp, is that they place, I mean, it is that is a really good video, because it does demonstrate the intensity of physicalness, that is physicality that is occurs during those periods of time. Is there an intellectual aspect of it? Absolutely. Is there a human understanding aspect of it? Absolutely. But the moral character component is tied into every single activity. You've got the guys the gals going through the creek up there, the heavy rucksack, the confidence course. Each one of those things during this training, they're going to get some type of a exposure on a military member, a Marine, a historical anecdote of what they did during that time. That is over and over again within this 10-week or 12-week process. And then the last aspect of it is a crucible. And the crucible exercise is 54 hours. It's basically the last couple days that is the capstone event. And during this period of time, there's sleep deprivation, there's basically food deprivation, 45 miles, 36 warrior stations. At the end of each one of those warrior stations, again, there is an explanation of, there's a story, an anecdote of some war situation that courage, honor, and commitment were demonstrated by individual Marines. And so you just can't help but take that on. Irrespective of whatever background you came, that starts to become part of your moral character. That's basically the way that the military, that the Marine Corps develops moral character. And then after you leave that particular unit, after you leave boot camp or officers candidate school, and then you join your future units, that type of difficult training is continued. It's sustained, and that's a big piece of that. And so that is the way the military, the Marine Corps specifically, develops moral character. There's no religious component to it. There's nothing like that. We look at 3 core values: courage, honor, commitment. Those core values are found in every religion and in no religion. I mean, they basically perpetuate through all societies. And so it's something that I think that even at KU, I think it's something that we could probably take on a little bit more. So with that, I'm going to leave two last things. I'm going to leave with a positive story of something that where this was displayed, and then I'm going to maybe open up or ask you a question and open up for anything. So a positive story for the Strategic Corporal happened in 2004 when I was in Iraq. And there was a period of time where IEDs, improvised explosive devices, they were everywhere. Marines were losing limbs, traumatic brain injuries, the signature injury of Iraq and Afghanistan. And at this point, vehicle-borne IEDs were starting to be introduced at a lot more rapid pace than we have seen before. And there was a combat outpost all the way out in western Iraq. Again, as far away from the division headquarters as you could possibly be. It was basically almost on the Jordanian border. And in this particular combat outpost, they had several VBIEDs, the vehicle-borne IEDs, attacks against them. And on this particular day, we had a young corporal, strategic corporal, that was out on the running the perimeter for that. And approaching at a rapid rate of speed, and he was warned of this, was a station wagon. A little bit unusual. That wasn't something, that wasn't the normal kind of motor MO of the Iraqis. So we had this station wagon that was approaching at a high rate of speed. And the corporal did everything that he was supposed to do. He goes through the escalation of force procedures, which are basically non-lethal procedures. They have these loud speakers that basically could blow out just about anything. And so, you know, warning, and it's in Arabic. So, I mean, definitely they're getting the attention. That didn't get the attention. So then the next thing, as they get it closer, they've got these dazzlers, which are kind of a laser that dazzles. They definitely will get people screw up with their eyes and stuff like that, even in daytime. And that still didn't do it. So the last escalation of force procedure before you take lethal force are warning shots. And the warning shots are of a large enough caliber that they would definitely get people's attention. That didn't work. So the corporal was absolutely he would have been completely within the rules of engagement if he would have go ahead and taken lethal force on that station wagon. But for whatever reason, he didn't. So something didn't feel right in his gut. And so the station wagon actually started to slow down as it approached the thing, and it came to an abrupt stop. And out of that came an Iraqi father holding his young son, who was injured, severely injured by an IED, something that was placed in by Al-Qaeda. And the young father knew that there was only one place where he was going to be able to find medical help that was going to be able to save his life son, and that was with the Marines at the combat outpost. Thank God we had a corpsman. That was just amazing, and they were able to save the boy's limb, life and limb. And because of that situation, again, because of the decision, that part of that was a moral decision that corporal made. That particular father no longer looked at the United States in the same way that he looked before that. So, you know, that I just remember, I'll never forget reading that situation report as it came in. It was just something that, again, will stay with me forever. So I guess I'll leave that and then just ask a couple of open-ended questions. The first one is, what's your why? You know, when I saw that first video for the Marine Corps in 1983, man, I was all in. I knew that was what I wanted, you know, and what's your why? And then with whatever your why is, you know, how does that line up with the core values of the hospital? And do we have core values of both the Med Center and KU Hospital? You know, and then the last thing is, if you're trying to reinforce moral character, you know, what are the simulations? What are the things that you can do here that actually bring that out in a stressful environment? So in simulation, so when you are faced with that, you've gone through that simulation enough times that you know how you'll react. So with that, I thank you again. It's such an honor to be in front of there. My wife said, "Really, will anybody be there?" I didn't share that you were being fed. But with that, thank you. And if there are any questions, I'll certainly be open to open it up. And I got you out of time to make the next group. So. I am absolutely not offended if there are no questions, so don't feel like you have to force anything. Yes.
ability of people to serve.
Yeah.
So the first question about that is are those percentages based on in order to work?
Yeah,
Are they
right.
based on the population, or are they based on the applicant pool?
No, that's the general population.
So then that leads into my next question of what we as students, clinicians, healthcare leaders, and influencers can do to impact that pool.
Yeah.
From your perspective.
Well, yeah, I mean, it gets to the heart of my point that there's that particular problem has two components to it. There's the technical component, which we know, we know how to tell people to get healthy, but how do they take that on themselves? I don't have a good answer for that. I mean, part of that is, how, examples, positive role models up there, because again, when you're talking about that portion of it, you really are trying to change people's beliefs and values and attitudes. And I think one of the best ways to do that is for them to be able to see, people that they look up to that are exhibiting those type of behaviors. I know if I try, talking to my kids, if I'm not doing it, they're not going to necessarily follow that. The other answer to that question, though, has nothing to do with the health. There's the percentage of people that remain are widely, I mean, well enough to be able to recruit from if there's a penchant for them to serve. That's actually a bigger problem, because right now you're only looking at about 1% of the population that makes a decision to serve in the military. So is there a problem with the way the military is presenting itself, or is it a value proposition with the individuals that they just don't see the desire? So yeah, there's the health aspect of it, but then there's the other thing, and that's just the penchant, the want to serve. Yes, sir.
So is the health aspect related to obesity or smoking, or what might it be?
Obesity is the largest reason of that 60% that I showed you. Some of the other things, I mean, there's eyesight, there's hearing. I mean, there's some physical things that the military just can't waive. But the biggest problem is obesity. I mean, I showed you not all of the services value the physical fitness the same way the Marine Corps does. Interestingly enough, the Marine Corps has the Army has the biggest recruiting goal. And that's just because the Army is so big. But the Marine Corps is the youngest service by far. And so we rotate people, that we after one tour, a much lower percentage of people continue on. And so we have to, compared to the overall population, I think it's about 180,000 in the Marine Corps, we have to take in, I think, like 36,000 every single year to maintain that. Yes, sir.
So the folks go through all the training, they go through their service, they separate. What kind of transition plans are in place for all these leaders now that they're back in civilian?
Yeah, I mean, the services have put a lot of effort in trying to help that transition. I mean, obviously the VA they've got a big portion of that. This is something that I don't think a lot of people are aware of. But if a veteran, an individual who served, gets out and doesn't have a job right away, the military has to pay that unemployment compensation. It's part of their budget every year. Seems kind of weird, but that is. And so I would like to say that it was all altruistic reasons why the services put this large effort. But during Iraq and Afghanistan, when you had a much larger pool of population of the services, because we expanded during that period of time, and we had, and it was very well publicized, the significant amount of veterans that did not have jobs. the services got after that because they realized how much of a bill that was for unemployment compensation. And so they stood up these commands, these transition assistance programs that basically focused on that. And they looked at different populations, those that are going to go to higher education, those that want to do VOTEC type of schools. And I know that that's not the nom de jour that we use anymore. And then there was a third population, which I'm drawing a blank on. But they put together programs that tried to bridge type of programs that help facilitate that transition. And I think that by and large, there was there were some successes there, largely because the nation wanted it to be successful. And so companies really reached out and tried to find ways that they can onboard military members. I think that the challenges that we have with the TBIs, some of the PTSD that we, was well documented, that certainly is an area that could have been improved upon. I think we were a little bit slow in responding to that, and so you had this pool. So much like a lot of things, until it gets to a crisis situation, you don't necessarily take the steps that I think. But once it does, the nation does have incredible capabilities to respond. Yes, sir.
Following on from Jeff's question, do you have programs for returning service personnel to come back here? As a unit leader here, I'm not aware of any specific. I'm certainly not encouraged in any meaningful way that I'm aware of to hire military people over.
Yeah, for that aspect of it, as far as hiring, I don't know. I'm unaware. I will say from the student perspective, I'm very proud of what the university on the Lawrence campus has done. We opened up a student veteran center, 3,000 square foot center. We've got a director, April Blackman Strange, who is. She did. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
You're welcome.
I hired her. I hired her. She worked for me for, and quite frankly, I came over a couple times, and I heard her at I forget what she was speaking at, and I knew we were getting ready to hire. So I told her, I said, you apply for this position, and I won't say any more than that because HR will come back and say that was you didn't follow the rules, which I did. She just happened to finish on time. No, but anyway, yeah, that Student Veteran Center is, she has done a remarkable job, and we really focus on 3 phases. The first is the critical, which we put most of our effort in, and that is that first year, to make sure that when they show up, they feel that they're part of that camaraderie that they just left. Some of them don't necessarily want that, and some don't need it, but for the most part, they do want it. And so we have a student veteran group within the Student Veteran Center. And I say student veterans, it's really military affiliated because it's much broader than just the student veterans. We look at military families, the spouses, the dependents. We look at ROTC, we throw a wide umbrella, and make sure that first year that there's any type of counseling, advising, everything that is targeted for veterans that is in place. And then and then persistence to degree. Programs to help that, and then probably something that's unique for KU is we really look at the career aspect of it, veteran-friendly hiring companies and being able to put them in places. So that's one of the efforts that we do for students. But with respect to career for people that are looking to onboard to KU, I'm unfamiliar with that. Yes, sir.
Pleasure to meet you. And you speak. My name is John Haynes. I'm the school certified official here at the university.
Awesome.
So I assist veterans, and the last 2 years we've seen an increase of about 80%.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
So I'm completely honored to be able to assist. I also served in the Marines in the early 70s. Just a little bit before your time. So,
not much.
I just wanted to acknowledge and let you know that we do all we can here when we have quite a response, many questions, inquiries, many benefits and services. We'd love to have you stop by our office.
Absolutely.
And share with you some of the things that we've done, accomplished. Certainly at your convenience. And my supervisor, Marla Herring.
Oh, yes.
Registrar.
Yep.
And I think
Yep.
she had a question earlier, so.
Yep.
Hello, we know each other.
Yeah, Marla.
I just had a quick question.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples of how the moral code has been incorporated in curriculum in higher education?
Yeah, that's a great question. No, I don't. Other than
the project for April.
Yeah,
So.
Other than what I do for my own class, and I used to teach the communications and leadership, and now I teach a national security and intelligence studies course, and I certainly bring in an ethical component to that. But yeah, no, and you know, I'm confident that the School of Business talks about business ethics, but I don't think they talk about it in the same way that I use the term. But and if I can, just one thing, I'm hoping, and I don't know this to be the case, but I'm hoping that a lot of the effort that we've done at KU, the reason you're seeing some of the increase of population is because veteran students that were on the Lawrence campus have now, they had such a good experience that they're, you know, coming to the med school. I don't know if there's any correlation there, but I hope there is.
There is definitely April and her staff and us, we work together a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Great.
Your efforts are absolutely spilling over.
Good.
Hey, Mr. Denny.
Yes, sir.
Nice to see you again.
Hey.
So some of us had the pleasure of visiting the METC.
Yeah.
Just briefly describe what the METC.
Yeah. So it's in San Antonio, the Medical Education Training Center. And basically any enlisted, not the officers, but any enlisted member that is going to be in the medical community, from respiratory care, health information management, when Norb was here, you know, corpsmen, nurses, I mean, they go through the schooling at San Antonio. And what's interesting there is the curriculum has been looked at by, I know the American Council for Education. I'm not sure who if there's a medical component that would look at that, but they basically looked at the curriculum almost on every military occupational specialty, and they've said this should have equivalency within a university for these type of credits. What's the immaculate? What's the name of the immaculate?
Carnet Word.
Immaculate Carnet Word is a community college that is down in San Antonio, and they've had this great relationship with METC, and so they offer an Associate of Arts degree based on a lot of the curriculum that the students get there, as well as some of the gen ed requirements. Now, the reason I think that this is viable for this conversation is within respiratory care and health information management. You know, we went down there and basically said, okay, how could this line up for a 2+2 program? And if not 2+2, how can it just line up where these students come to KU for the online programs, with the understanding that they're going to be deployed nationwide? And talk to me about any success of those efforts.
Actually, we just had a graduate recently stationed in the Middle East.
Fantastic. Yeah.
The thing that amazed me the most was just the training from this team leadership standpoint, especially the field medics that through their simulation experiences down there with actual stage set up built, I believe, by Disney World. Is that correct?
I think so, yeah.
The stage
Yeah.
and the simulation of the field medics during a battle situation, the team leadership that occurred during that time was incredible.
Yeah. The Chancellor and I, of course, he came from here. We went to Fort Riley about 6 or 7 months ago and went through some of their simulation. The Chancellor was of the belief that what the simulation that we have here is actually on par or maybe even above that. And so I know that there has been exchanges with both the National Guard something that we're trying to increase a little bit more. Certainly with Fort Riley, I think even Fort Leavenworth, where they've sent people here to KU Med. Okay, I know that we're at time.
I think Jenny has a little gift for you, and
oh man,
a round of applause.
Thank you so much again. I really appreciate it.